lessons will be coming from this. Yeah. So basically, when we're dealing with there are two or maybe three. Yeah, there are three main concepts that we look at in this particular course. Okay, there is what we call trade theory, and there's also what we call patterns of trade. There's also what we call trade policy. So we need to understand these three before making any progress. We need to understand these three. Okay, so basically, when we're talking about trade theory, we're just looking at the principles, the principles of trade. Where in that case, we just look at what are the guiding principles for trade. Okay, that is covered in trade theory. But with trade policy, we look at the actual policies that must be implemented, or the actual policies that are there that try to guide how trade is supposed to be conducted between or among countries. Oh yeah. So every time you are dealing with trade theory, you're just looking at the basis for trade. Basically, you're going to be looking at what is supposed to be there for trade to take place. And I'm sure by now you understand that nations can only engage in trade if and only if they both benefit from trade, right? So that kind of analysis falls under trade theory. Okay, and since we're talking about nations gaining, how are these gains generated? What is it that is supposed to be there for these gains to be generated? Since nations can only engage in trade if and only if they're benefiting from trade, right? So there should be some form of gains. So how are these gains generated? So that is going to be covered under a trade theory. Okay, and since for nations to engage in trade, there should be some form of gain. How large are these gains? Okay, how large are these gains? And at the end of it all, how are they divided among these nations that engage in trade? So for you and I to trade, we're supposed to, both of us are supposed to trade to benefit, right? Which means you're supposed to gain, I'm supposed to gain. Okay, but the question is, how are these gains going to be generated? What mechanism are you going to use for these gains to be generated, right? At the same time, we need to ask ourselves a question: how large are these gains? Okay, the larger the gains, the more beneficial our interaction is going to be. All right. Yeah, so all this is covered under trade theory. So the first part of this course, basically, you'll be dealing with trade theory. Everything will be based on trade theory. Then later on, we're going to look at the patterns of trade. Okay, so later on, we're going to be looking at the patterns of trade. Okay, where we'll be talking about Zambia, let's say producing good Y, then we have Malawi that is producing good X, and then so since Zambia is producing good Y and Malawi is producing good X, how are these going to what mechanism are they going to use for them to trade? Which one should be exported and which one should be imported? Why is Zambia importing this commodity and why is Zambia exporting this commodity? So all those will be covered under the patterns of trade. Okay, so basically with patterns of trade, we're just looking at the actual pattern in which trade is taking place. Okay, and then there's also what we call trade policy. Okay, under trade policy, now you look at the policies that are there, the policies that governs trade, and these depends on to some extent the region that you're falling in. Okay, if you're falling in the southern part of Africa, that's why we have got SADC, we have COMESA, we have basically we have got these two that try to implement trade policies. For our guys in the western side, they have ECOWAS, they have all those trade agreements and all those things. So all that is covered under trade policy, and this is going to be the last part of international trade. we'll be looking at trade policy. So the first part is going to be looking at trade theory. Then the second part will be looking at the patterns of trade. Then the last part will be looking at trade policy. So under trade policy, that is where you'll be looking at quotas, those things, trade restrictions. Should we impose an export quota? Should we impose an import quota? Those things. So all that will be covered under trade policy. All right. So under trade policy, we'll be looking at trade restrictions. Okay. We'll be looking at the type of instruments that countries use when it comes to restrictions. Okay. Yeah, and also be looking at the current status of our economy. What trade policies are we using as a nation, or currently what are some of the trade policies that countries are using? And a very good example that maybe may open someone's mind somewhere is the issue of, remember when Trump was there, the arguments, US, China, those trade issues. So all that conversation falls under trade policy. Okay, because what was happening was just, those guys were just trying to play around with trade policies. I'm going to restrict you from, importing this from China, and then China does the same, put the same type of restrictions on the US commodities. So all that conversation is covered under trade policy. So this is the roadmap. This is the roadmap of this particular course. So the first part will be looking at theory, okay, trade theory. The second part will be looking at the patterns of trade. Then the last part will be looking at trade policy. So this is how this particular course is segmented. Okay, this is how this particular course is segmented. Yeah, so basically, yeah, and I'm sure by now you guys have looked at absolute advantage, competitive advantage, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, those things, right? Labor theory of value. I think you've looked at all those things, and believe it or not, he likes asking questions, especially under trade theory. Okay, because for you to progress, to start looking at trade policy, you must understand trade theory. If you don't understand trade theory, it will be difficult for you, to apply or to understand the policy part of it. Okay, so just an introduction, we know, because we looked at this in first year. Like for us, we talked about absolute advantage, competitive advantage in first year. So I believe that was the same case with you guys. So we know that with absolute advantage, it was developed by Adam Smith. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nation, that thing. Okay, then later on, it was somehow better explained by David Ricardo using the patterns or the gains from trade. Okay, so absolute advantage was later on, better explained by David Ricardo using the competitive advantage concept. Okay, where but again, here's the catch. Every time I'm trying to explain competitive advantage, okay, or let me say, every time he's asking you to explain competitive advantage, do not forget this important point, that this guy Ricardo, he used the labor theory of value, okay, which was later on rejected because of some reasons that we're going to look at, that we're going to discuss. So with the labor theory of value, it's like for him, he used labor as the proxy. Okay, he used labor as the, like everything was supposed to hinge on labor, and that is the reason why, or to some extent, that is the reason why it was rejected. Okay, so another guy came in. Okay, another guy came in to try to refine Ricardo's competitive advantage concept by using opportunity cost theory. Okay, so it's not like it's not yesterday, or it's not today that people have had that people started this conversation about trade. Okay, it can go, back in the 17th century, somewhere there. Right, so a theory must be tested, a theory must be subjected to scientific analysis, and when it passes, then it can qualify to be called a theory. So of course, Adam Smith brought up absolute advantage, which was later on, more like explained better by David Ricardo, though Ricardo's concept was again rejected because of labor. Okay, this proxy variable that he used was not the correct one. Okay, so some other guy had to come in and refine Ricardo's work, where according to him now, using the same concept of competitive advantage, he only added opportunity cost. Okay, he only added opportunity cost, where, for instance, if Zambia can produce copper in let's say 1 ton of copper in 3 hours, and then Malawi can produce 1 ton of copper in 12 hours, then going back to opportunity cost, Zambia is better. Right, Zambia is better because we look at the value of the next best alternative. So for Zambia, check, we can only use 3 hours, and for these guys can use 12 hours. It means we are better. Okay, so it's funny that no much research has been done in trade, right? The only thing we do is we just produce these fake reports minus having proper analysis. So such reports cannot be used to explain such important phenomena. Alright, so we expect one of us to come up with a proper theory of trade that is going to add on to where this guy left it. Okay, but the challenge is, you guys are doing funny things now. Alright, so basically today we're just trying to understand this history. Okay, we're just trying to understand this history. Okay, so we have looked at one fundamental concept, and that is that countries can only engage in trade if and only if both of them benefit from that transaction. Okay, you can only engage in trade if and only if you're going to benefit. If you don't benefit, it doesn't make sense. I mean, why are you even doing that, right? Yeah, so of course, what are some of the conditions that can force countries not to trade? Okay, so when you have identical technology, I mean, there is no superiority. What you have is what I have. The technology that you are using is the same level of technology that I can use, which means that there is no one is better than the other. We can produce the same thing using the same type of technology, using this, I mean, under the same to some extent under the same conditions, using the same time. Okay, amount of time is same. So I mean, what you can do, I can do. So in such a case, countries cannot trade, right? Again, when you have, to some extent, you have the same fact endowment, what you have is what I have. The factors of production that you have are the exact factors of production that I have, which means what you can produce, I can also produce. Alright, so in short, if you're looking at conditions for countries to trade, you just flip these. Okay, so under identical technology, you can say countries can only trade if and only if they have different levels of technology, which means that in that case there will be superiority. One is going to be superior than the other, right? Countries can trade if and only if they have different fact endowments. You have copper, I have gold, then you can trade. You can give me your gold, you can give me your copper, I can give you my gold, then you can trade, right? So if we have the same factors of production, there is no basis for us to trade. Okay, the other thing is, if we have constant returns to scale, you increase your production by 10%, you happen to you increase your inputs by 10%, your output also increases by 10%. I can do the same. Okay. In short, when you have constant returns to scale, it's difficult for countries to trade. Why? Because you find that the same, if you can increase your inputs by 10%, your output also increases by 10%, then I mean that would mean that, you know, like it would be difficult for you to increase your levels of production. Okay. Because if, like, practically what firms want is a situation where you pump in less amount of income in your business and the business bears more than the input, right? But a situation where you try to pump in money and yet the output is not enough for you to compete with your competitors. Because, for instance, practically, we are not the only ones that are producing copper. All right, Chile is producing copper. These other countries are also producing copper. So, if we try, for instance, to compete with those guys, okay, if we try to compete with those guys, we increase our production by 10%. We only get output, like let's say an increase in output of 10%, and then there's someone out there who has got increasing returns to scale. They increase their production, they increase their inputs by, let's say, 10%. The output increases to 50%, and then how can we compete with such people? Which means that only those countries that have got increasing returns to scale can properly engage in trade. Okay. The other thing is, no two countries can engage in trade if they have the same tastes. Okay. For trade to take place, these two nations should have different tastes. The tastes in Zambia must not be equal to the taste in Malawi. Alright? So if they're different, it means that the Malawians will know that, okay, Zambians' tastes are oriented toward, let's say, iPhones, which means they can produce iPhones and sell to us. And then for us, we're going to know that, okay, Malawian tastes are actually oriented towards, let's say, Samsung phones. Then it will be easier for us to produce Samsung phones, and ultimately we can engage in trade. Okay, then we can engage in trade. So those are some of the conditions or reasons, or conditions that can allow countries not to trade. So the flip side of these can actually allow countries to trade. Okay, so if you know the negative side, you just flip it, which means you'll be able to know the positive side. Hi.
Could you kindly repeat on constant returns to scale?
Constant returns to scale. So you and I are into production. Let's say we're producing fritters. Okay, and let's say that we are competing. Okay, we're competing for a buyer somewhere. Okay, and then for me, when I increase my production, let's say by 10%, my output is going to increase by 10%. But for you, because you have got increasing returns to scale, if you increase your inputs, okay, your output is going to increase by, let's say, 50%, which means that for you, since you have got increasing returns to scale, it will be easier for you to trade with another nation. But for me, with constant returns to scale, it will be difficult, because I'll just give up and say I can't do what this other person is able to do. You see that? So in short, for a country to engage in trade with another country, one of them should have increasing returns to scale. In short, it means that even just the two of us, for us to engage in trade, right? If I have constant returns to scale and you have increasing returns to scale, it's obvious that since you have increasing returns to scale, you can supply to me. Which means that for me, I have to look for another thing in which I'll have increasing returns to scale. But if both of us have got constant returns to scale, we cannot compete. We cannot trade. So you can look at it from both sides, from competition point of view, and also you and I to trade. If what you can do, I can also do, we can't trade, right? But if you have got increasing returns to scale, that will be the basis for us to engage in trade, because you are better than me. You can supply to me, which means that for me, I have to look for another commodity which I'll have increasing returns to scale so that I can sell it to you. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes, it's clear.
Okay, I'm avoiding shouting. I don't want to. Oh, okay. I assume I didn't see this. So quickly, let's look at the advantages of engaging in trade. Okay, what are some of the advantages of engaging in trade? So I'm sure by now you guys understand specialization. Okay, so specialization is just a situation where you identify that I'm good at this particular thing, and then you put all your resources, you put all your effort in the production of that particular thing. In short, you're going to specialize, right? So when there's trade and you specialize, it means that you're going to gain, you're going to benefit from your specialization, right? Because it means that because you are specializing, because you're trading and you're trading in that particular commodity, which is your specialty, then you're going to earn more, right? So international trade enables countries to obtain benefits of specialization. Why? Because you have specialized in the production of let's say iPhones, and I have specialized in the production of, let's say, Motorola phones, and since I have specialized in that particular thing, then I'm going to supply more of that particular thing, right? And the more I supply it, the more money I make. And the same thing applies to you. You have specialized in iPhones, right? And the more iPhones you make, the more money you make. Okay, so at the end of the day, since you have specialized in the production of iPhones and you're making money from the production of iPhones, it means that even your living standards are expected to go up, right? To rise. And the same applies to me. Okay, so when countries specialize, for instance, the Zambian case, we specialized in the exports of copper, right? And well, let's put politics aside. Yeah, so we have specialized in the production of copper, and the assumption is that the more copper we sell, the more money we make, and the more money we make, the more the more developmental projects like we carry out, right? And therefore ultimately our living standards are expected to be on the rise. So in short, when countries engage in international trade, they benefit from specialization. Okay, they benefit from specialization. So that is one benefit. Another thing is that to some extent, when you engage in trade, you're more like expanding the market, right? Okay, and when you expand the market, at the end of the day, ultimately there will be large scale production. Okay, so at the end of the day, when you engage in trade, you'll be able to specialize, and as you are specializing, you are going to be able to produce on a larger scale. Why? Because you're going to lower your production costs. Here's the situation where, for instance, let us assume that Zambia is do we have diamond in Zambia? I doubt. We don't have gold. So let's say that we are assuming that we have diamond, and for us to mine this thing diamond and refine it and sell it is quite expensive on our side, right? Okay, and then there is someone somewhere who can produce this same diamond at a lower cost. So now, since we as Zambia, we can specialize in the production of copper, which means that we'll be able to produce this copper on a larger scale, and those guys can also produce the diamond on a larger scale. So at the end of the day, large scale production is going to be obtained. Why? Because we have allowed ourselves to engage in trade. Okay, Yeah, we have allowed ourselves to engage in trade, and because of this we will be able to produce on a larger scale. The other way in which you can try to analyze this is a situation where, let's say, we don't want to engage in trade. We want to produce both copper and diamond on our own now. Okay, we want to produce both copper and diamond on our own. And now, for us to produce copper, we need some form of technology, right? For us to produce diamond, we also need some form of technology, right? So it means that we'll be bearing higher costs, okay? Because we're supposed to improve the technology for producing copper. At the same time, we're also expected to improve the technology for diamond production, because we don't want to engage in trade. But the moment we engage in trade, someone else will be supplying, let's say, diamond to us, and it means that for us, we're going to use all our resources, we're going to concentrate all our resources on the production of copper. Therefore, this will allow us to produce on a larger scale. Okay, so international trade is going to more like expand the market, which will ultimately reduce the production costs of the trading members. Okay, and ultimately these guys will be able to produce on a larger scale. Okay, the other thing is competition. Okay, the other thing is competition. Because of international trade, okay, countries are now competing. Okay, countries are now competing. Who is going to produce, the top quality, the best quality of this particular output? So, because of international trade, there is now an increase in competition, and because of this increase in competition, countries try to more like increase their efficiency. They're going to work on their quality, they're going to increase their efficiency so that they can make their output more attractive compared to their competitors' output. Alright, so at the end of the day, intertrade increases competition. Okay, I think you can relate. Assume that you're fighting for the same girl. You're going to come up with your own tactics so that you can win the girl, right? So the same can apply here. You are competing for the same buyer. Okay, so let's say this is copper, Zambia. We are competing for the same buyer. Who is the buyer? China is the buyer. And now there is copper in Zambia, there is copper in the DR. And let's say that China wants to buy the best quality, the best quality, top quality copper, which means that Zambia is going to try to make its copper more attractive by, making it, let's say, adding value, okay, adding value to it. And the same is going to apply with the DR. Just a second. Okay, thank you, Auntie. Karimu. Okay, zafaka. Alright, I'm back. How is it going? How is it going, Natasha?
It's going ahead so far, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so we're saying that intertrade is going to increase competition, yeah, and as that is happening, quality is going to increase, right? Efficiency is also going to increase, because let's say that China wants to buy 10 metric tons of copper, and the target is, let's say they've given you 1 week. So whosoever is going to produce this much in a week is going to become their permanent, dealer, right? It means that your efficiency, you're going to work on your efficiency. At the same time, you're going to work on your quality. So because of intertrade, there's competition. And this competition is going to increase your efficiency, right? Yep. Yeah, and then this one is obvious anyway. We've seen our big guy trying by all means to use his office to market Zambia, right? So in short, intertrade is going to promote some beneficial. So the key word here is beneficial. It's supposed to be mutual, not one-sided, right? So intertrade is going to promote beneficial political links between countries, right? And that is why we've got SADC, we've got COMESA, we have Commonwealth, we have OPEC. Those organizations were formed with the core purpose of helping their members to benefit from trade, right? Okay, this course is going to become more enjoyable when you start looking at trade policy. That's when it makes sense, because for now everything is a bit hazy, hexoline, it's not making sense at all. Yeah, but with trade policy you'll be relating. Okay, so now let's go back to history and try to understand what history tells us about trade. So the first guys, to some extent, the first group of guys, the first group of thinkers, not us the copy and paste people, the first group of thinkers were the mercantilists, right? And these guys, they, according to them, trade is not mutual. Trade is not mutual. One nation is supposed to cry, not really crying, but for you to become rich, for you to become more developed, you have to export more than you're importing, right? So go back to GDP equation, trade balance, exports less import. If you're exporting more than you're importing, you have a surplus, right? You have a trade surplus. So this was their thinking, that for a country to develop, for a country to make more money, it's supposed to export more than it is importing. So because of this, governments of such nations must do whatsoever it is within their powers to make sure that they are exporting more than they are importing. But do you know the problem with this? The problem is that for you to export more than you're importing, it means that you're using your trade policy, and the chances are so high that your trading partners will do the same. Will do the same. They're also going to try to export more to you than they're importing from you, which means that at the end of the day, trade is going to constrict. But away from the criticism, with the mercantilists, their view is that you have to export more than you're importing, right? So that's their view. So you have to export more than you're importing. Trade is not mutually beneficial. One party is supposed to win at the expense of the other. The reason is simple. It's not always the case that you're going to have the same amount of resources at the same time. So It's not always the case that they're going to have the same copper at the same time, which means that that country with more copper is supposed to export and make more money at the expense of the other country. Okay, so for them, they maintained that for a nation to become rich and powerful, it needed to export more than it is importing. Okay, what is the resulting impact? The resulting impact is a trade surplus. Okay, and this is going to be settled by the amount of money that you're receiving, the gold, the silver, and all that. The more gold and silver you have, the more rich you have, right? Yeah, so that's according to the mercantilists. Just a second, let me pick this phone call. Hello? Sima gonna this time. I'm gonna this time. So nipunzisa hapa nikakutumia nko nipunzisa nikutumia nko after 30 minutes. Okay. Alright, sorry about that. Yeah, so here is the reason. Since all nations could not simultaneously have an export surplus, okay, and the amount of gold and silver is going to be fixed at any given point in time, then it means that Zambia has to gain at the expense of Malawi. That's according to the mercantilists. Okay, so in short, actually, if you have noticed, right? If you have noticed, we are going back to this. Every nation is trying to restrict their imports and promote their exports, which is purely, mercantilist in nature, because you want to export more than you're importing, and for you to do that, you're supposed to play around with your trade policy. You're supposed to impose quotas. You're supposed to, to impose what you call the VAS, the voluntary export restraints. Like we are going back to mercantilism. Okay, we are going back to mercantilism. So there are times when he might ask you to use practical examples that fit mercantilist views. Okay, so the most practical example is what is going on right now. Even Zambia, we are trying to impose these trade restrictions. Okay, that is why you cannot export midi meal. That's a trade restriction. Okay, that's a trade restriction because they're trying to deal with the problem of shortage. Okay, just today or the other day, there is that truck that was loaded with milimi on the copper belt. It was impounded. That is an example of a trade restriction, because if those guys weren't impounded, obviously they'd have smuggled into, let's say, Diara and make more money. All right, so we are more like going back to mercantilism, where trade restrictions are now coming in, the quotas and all those things, right? Yeah. So what are the implications of mercantilism? Okay, so the point is that the more you sell, the more money you make, right? Which means that, if for instance, let's take an example of China. Those guys have been beating us when it comes to trade. They're exporting more than they're importing to some extent, and especially to Africa. We are now shifting from the West, from being dependent on the West, we are now shifting to be dependent on China. Okay, and this is the debate going on. Is China going to be a good trade partner compared to the Western side? People are arguing that no, this can be the case because the Western side has been, what term can I use? Exploitative. Yeah, they have been exploiting on us trade wise. We're not benefiting, so let's try to look for more, for new trade partners, and all routes are now going to China. Okay, hoping that this one is going to work out, which I doubt, because We're not counted as people. That's the point. We're not counted as people. I'm not a racist. But then Nakana Palima Matambo is racist. Anyway, yeah, so the point is that the more we sell, the more money we make, the more armies we have, the more powerful we become. Check China. Those guys are becoming powerful every day. Everybody's talking about China. Why? Because they have hammered us from left, right, and center. Okay? Yeah, so the more money you have in circulation, then the greater the chances of increasing your business activities. And we know that if an economy is more active, then chances are so high that it's going to develop more and more. So by encouraging exports and restricting imports, what are we trying to do? We are trying to stimulate our output, and for output to increase, we must employ more people, right? So at the end of the day, our employment rate is going to increase and reduce the unemployment rate. So that's according to the mercantilists, and these are the implications of such kind of thinking, right? It's good because if you can beat your partners by selling more to them than you're buying from them, you're going to have more money. The more money you make, the more developed you become. That's okay. That's a good one. Okay, so this far, how is it going? Issues? Do you have issues?
No.
Oh, no issues. Okay, let's move. Okay, so now we've looked at the mercantilists, and we've now to some extent understood their school of thought. So why then is it important to be going back to history? Because this is history. Okay, why then is it important for us to go back to history and start using it today? So what we know is that all these guys, Adam Smith, Ricardo, if we want to understand what they said, okay, we must to some extent view their arguments as a reaction to the mercantilists. Because for instance, David Ricardo, he's talking about competitive advantage, right? Where according to him, trade is not one-sided. Trade must be mutual. So if we want to understand what David Ricardo said, we must first understand what the mercantilists said. Okay, so the mercantilists say that trade is one-sided. Only one party can win at a given point in time. That's according to them. But Ricardo is saying, no, that's not a good one. Both parties can win. So for us to properly understand the arguments of Ricardo and Adam Smith, we must try by all means regard those as reactions to what the mercantilist said. Okay, so that's the first reason. The other reason is what I'm just from explaining to you, that if you bring it down to today, okay, every country is trying to impose trade restrictions, which is pure mercantilism, right? Huh? Someone's mic was on. Are you trying to say something? Please feel free. As usual, rules have not changed. You can stop me at any time. Yeah, I assume someone has just made a mistake. Yeah. So like now every nation is trying to impose these trade restrictions and all those things. So it therefore makes sense to start talking about mercantilist even in the 21st century, because what these guys predicted is what is taking place, right? Yeah. Okay. Then we can start looking at absolute advantage. I assume I'm not fast, because the purpose is to bridge that gap, and you know the gap I'm talking about. So if I'm as fast as, then not making any difference. Okay, so let me get feedback. Miriam, your hand is up.
It was a mistake.
Oh,
I think I thought I was unmuting the mic when I raised my hand.
okay. Sandra, your mic was open.
I was saying you are not.
I didn't get that. The net was breaking. Okay, so we can move ahead, right? Yeah, we can. Thank you. Let's just do that. Yeah. So we've looked at the mercantilist, and now let's look at what this old man said, Adam Smith. Okay. Yeah, because those guys, the mercantilists, said that trade is one-sided. Only one party can win, and the other party has to lose and cry, right? So this guy argued that a country can gain. Okay, we can gain by trading with other countries. Okay, and for this thing to happen, trade must be done not by force, but voluntarily. I have to voluntarily engage in trade. Okay, and of course, for this to happen, both parties must gain. Okay, both parties must gain. But how can they do this? They can do this through absolute advantage. Okay, so it's this. So now we can go back to the first reason why mercantilism still makes sense. We are saying that for us to properly understand what these other guys are saying, we must regard their arguments as a reaction to the mercantilists. So the mercantilists said that trade is one-sided. Then these guys are now saying trade is not one-sided. Both parties can win. Okay, both parties can win. How can this happen? Trade must be on a voluntary basis. You are supposed to do, or you are supposed to engage yourself in trade voluntarily. You're not supposed to be forced. And what's the benchmark? What's the base for this? Absolute advantage. Okay. So of course, with this one, basically talks about efficiency. Okay, efficiency. If you're more efficient in copper production, go ahead, specialize. Okay, specialize in the production of copper because you are more efficient. You can use you use less time to produce, let's say, a ton of copper, and then there's Malawi that can take the whole year. I'm not trying to demean anyone anyway. That can take the whole year to produce the same ton. So since you guys are good, since you guys are efficient, carry on. Please be mining the copper. Okay, be mining the copper, deplete your copper. Copper is a non-renewable resource, so the more we mine, the more we affect the next generation. And this is one thing that is not there in the economic field. For us, we just believe in optimization. You produce, you optimize, you sell, you make your money and enjoy your money. The next generation is going to handle it on their own. They'll have their own problems, of course. It doesn't concern us. Yeah, anyway. So with absolute advantage, we are saying the central theme is efficiency. Okay, so if you are more efficient than the other nation, then you have an advantage. Okay, you have an absolute advantage. So if you are more efficient in the production of one commodity, okay, and you are inefficient or you are less efficient in the production of the other commodity, then specialize in this particular commodity where you are more efficient. Okay, specialize in the production of that, then let the other party specialize in the production of that commodity in which you are inefficient, which means that the other party is producing, you are also producing two opposite commodities, then you can engage in trade. And this trade is going to be beneficial to both parties. You're going to be smiling even as I smile. Okay, so it's more like it's counter-reacting to what the mercantilists said, because the mercantilists are saying only one guy can win, and then you are coming saying no, we can both win as long as you specialize, I also specialize. All right. Okay, so both nations can gain by each specializing in the production of the commodity of its absolute advantage, and at the end of the day we're going to exchange our outputs and win. So both parties can win. So please, when you're explaining competitive advantage according to Adam Smith, they're just keywords that you don't need to miss. Words like efficient, less efficient, specializing, absolute advantage, those things. Okay, so please, when you are trying to, that's the key with the lecturer. Don't miss keywords. Okay, don't miss keywords. But this does not mean you should be gunning. You can't gun all these notes. They're just a lot. Unless you are Windows 11 on your own. Yeah, you have your own RAM, you have your own storage. Then carry on and gun. Okay, so what is the implication of absolute advantage? Okay, if I can specialize, if I can specialize in the production of copper, then I'm going to make sure I'm going to use all my resources. I'm going to divert all my resources to the production of copper, which means that these resources are going to be utilized in the most efficient way. Okay, one. Secondly, I am producing copper, of course, because I'm engaging in trade. Go back to the advantages of engaging in trade. We see that because of international trade, I'm going to be producing on a large scale, right? And the other party is going to be producing on a large scale. Therefore, output of both commodities will rise. Malawi is producing mazoe because they have got an absolute advantage in the production of that. Then there's you, Zambia, producing fruticana because you have an absolute advantage in the production of that. At the end of the day, there is an increase in the output of mazoe in Malawi. At the same time, there is an increase in the output of fruticana in Zambia. So ultimately, output of both commodities will rise. Okay, will rise, and at the end of the day, welfare is going to be maximized. Zambians' living standards are going to increase. The same will be applied in Malawi because they're producing and exporting mazoe, right? Yeah. Okay, how is it so far?
I have a question. I'm a bit confused whether you're talking about absolute advantage or comparative advantage.
No. I was just talking about absolute advantage. So if I talked about comparative advantage, I think my ancestors were just trying to confuse me.
Okay. Alright.
Okay. Right. So let's look at this example here. We have two countries.
Hello?
Hi.
Sorry to take you back. You said on the key terms to use for explaining comparative advantage.
Absolute advantage.
No, I'm not asking for the key terms to use to explain comparative advantage.
Have we discussed comparative advantage?
That's what you mentioned. That's why I also asked.
That's what I'm saying to say. I was supposed to be talking about absolute advantage. If I talked about if comparative advantage came out of this mouth, then it's because of my ancestors.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So yeah, we're talking about absolute advantage. Okay, we're talking about efficiency and all those things, right? Yeah. Okay, let's look at this example that tries to illustrate absolute advantage, right? So I've got two countries, the US and the UK. Okay, So the US can produce 6 bushels of wheat. Is it bushels? Yeah, per hour. Okay, so the US can produce 6, the UK can produce 1. With cloth yards per man hour, the US can produce 4, right? 4 yards per hour. The UK can produce 5. So from the absolute advantage point of view, okay, the US should just specialize in the production of wheat because they can produce 6 bushels per man hour. Wow, the UK can only produce 1. Okay, and when it comes to cloth, well, the UK should specialize in the production of cloth. Okay, so 1 hour of labor time produces 6 bushels of wheat in the US, which is what I'm just from explaining, but only 1 in the UK. All right, coming to cloth, 1 hour, okay, can produce 4 in the US, while the same 1 hour can produce 5. Therefore, well, the US people are more efficient, right? Okay, they have an absolute advantage in wheat than the UK. Therefore, the US should specialize in the production of wheat, and the UK should specialize in the production of cloth. And when this happens, the US can then export to the UK, and the UK can also export cloth to the US. Therefore, trade is going to be mutually beneficial. Both parties will be dancing, right? Not a situation where, mercantilists, though believe it or not, both mercantilism and this theory, they work. Both of them work. Yeah, both of them work, because we've seen specialization. Yeah, you can take Zambia for instance, Zambia. We have just specialized in the export of copper. We cannot export anything else except copper, and we are content, very much content. Tafika, we've reached where we want, just copper. It's okay. And now we're failing to make our own toothpick. We have to import from Zimbabwe. Yeah, it's called trader. Yeah, so the US is more efficient. Okay, so in short, what I'm saying is that with absolute advantage, we're looking at efficiency. How fast can you produce something? How much time do you take for you to meet your target? Yeah, so the US can only take 1 hour to produce the 6, and for you, and that's why even when choosing your research partners, I'm sure you guys are using this concept. Because if both of you have got an absolute disadvantage, hey, then you can't trade. You cannot trade. Okay, so I believe we've all understood this camera table, right? Yeah, we have. Thank you. I know you guys are sharp. Oh, let me not monopolize in case there's someone. Okay, which means everything is okay this far. Everything is okay this far. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure you guys, Derek told you how much you're supposed to pay. I've just remembered to talk about this. I know it's not part of the session. Yeah, so
He did that.
he has told you. That's what he's told me.
Okay, tell us again.
Let me confirm with him, because me, I love money, so I might end up telling you an exaggerated price when he told you a lower one. Anyway, the key thing is the full and the amount will be shared, I'm sure, in the WhatsApp group, which means that next time it's either we reach an agreement or we make that payment. Because I know 4 years, you guys, you want to play bad money. That's why for me, I just didn't want to. Yeah, but then due to some other reasons, Anyway, yeah, so away from that, okay, so now these guys have now specialized, right? The US has special, yeah, the US has, yeah, there is specialization. So the US has specialized in the production of wheat. The other guy has specialized in the production of what, cloth, yeah, cloth. So before specialization, okay, the total was, so for the US, wheat, yeah, wheat, not for the US, yeah, wheat, let's start with wheat. The US was producing 6, UK was producing 1, the total was 7. Okay, with cloth, the US was producing 4, the UK was producing 5, the total is, or was 9. But after specialization, okay, the US is going to specialize in the production of what's this, wheat. Okay, it's going to concentrate all its output to the production of wheat, and in this case it will just mean that the production is going to double. So the 12 here really just means that after specialization, you're going to concentrate all your resources to the production of this particular commodity. So we expect this commodity to increase. So don't say, but where did the 12 come from? We're just saying that practically, okay, practically you have specialized, which means that you are now going to be using, instead of wasting this hour to produce the other commodity, you are just using this to produce this particular commodity, which means that you now have a 12 for wheat. But earlier on, before specialization, the total was only 7, but after you have specialized, you are able to produce the 12. Okay, the same thing with cotton. Okay, was it cotton or cloth? I don't know. The same thing with cloth. The other guy, we said the UK now is going to specialize in the production of cloth, right? And the same applies, since it can now use all its resources to produce cloth. Okay, then the total output is just going to increase double. Okay, which means that output wise, both. So let's go back to the benefits of trade. Both outputs will increase, right? So this is what we are seeing here. Okay, that both output has increased for these two commodities. Okay, so practically and truly, at the end of the day, output is going to increase for both products due to specialization as a result of absolute advantage. Okay, so I'm needed for a family meeting. I'm supposed to go, so I'm going to pick it up from here tomorrow. I believe that's okay. The recording, I'll share it tomorrow.